Good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone to the show this morning. Today's guest is Ray Beshirs with Blue Shield Tactical Systems. And Ray was with Texas law enforcement for 23 years. He's a master peace officer license. He has over 17 years of police officer training and 15 years of police cadet, to where he trains and military personnel and training them for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Good morning, Ray. How you doing this morning?
Doing great. Yourself?
I'm blessed. Thank you for asking. And also for all the viewers, at the bottom of the screen, you'll see Ray's contact information, the website. And as we go on in today's show, Ray's going to go over some of the different courses, the description of them. So if you yourself are interested in obtaining the courses, or you want to actually provide that course for your agency, or you want to pay for another agency or a department to actually receive the training, or military personnel to receive the training, please contact Ray at the bottom of the screen right there, website, email, and everything else as well too. So Ray, again, good morning. How you doing this morning?
Doing great. It's not too hot here in Texas, so that's always a good thing.
Yes, sir. It's a blessing. And then, so I kind of want to go into the start of everything, like rewind in time, take your little time capsule if you want. But, what led you into law enforcement to begin with?
Actually, I went to the academy when I was 21 years old. Probably didn't need to be a police officer at 21, but I had a friend of mine that was in law enforcement. And I really, I was at that stage in my life, like most young people, that I really didn't know which direction I wanted to take, where I wanted to go with life. And when you start becoming an adult, you start to realize, hey, I have to pay bills, and I need a job, and I need a career, not just something I can, make minimum wage at, and something that actually interests me. And I could go back to the old mantra that, we say in law enforcement, I wanted to help people. That was part of it. I did want to help people. But at the same time, I wanted something that was interesting that I could do that's not the same thing every day. And really, law enforcement offered that. So it was a twofold for me, really. It was something that I could wake up every morning and go and do. And at the same time, have the benefit of helping my fellow neighbors and my community. So
awesome. And then, so in your 23 years in law enforcement, did something transpire during the course of your active duty that kind of led into your passions about what it is that you do now with Blue Shield and everything else that you do as well?
Well, since I was a kid, I was into martial arts, and I just kind of stuck with it. And I tried different types of martial arts, and when I got into law enforcement, I really started examining, what martial art I thought was really best for law enforcement, and what would be best for me on the street. And I'm not like you get some martial artists that, their martial art is the best martial art, and that's it, and so it's the same thing with companies that do what I do. Everyone thinks that they have, again, the secret sauce, and it's, we all have something to offer. And it's like every time one of our students comes to our class, I tell them, I say, go to other trainers as well. See what's out there, see what's available for you and your agency. If you just get stuck into one system alone, that may not offer everything that's the best out there. So if you take a little bit of everything and you put it together in your program, I think you'll be better off as an agency. And we should always be looking to learn, looking to develop, looking to provide what the service that's being expected by our citizens in this current environment.
Awesome. And then, so what led into the Blue Shield Tactical Systems? How long have you been doing that? Was it during your active duty of law enforcement, or was that something that took place, upon retirement and everything else too?
No, I actually started in 2014, approximately, a little bit before that. It's like with any business that you're starting, it's not an overnight endeavor. It's quite a process, and so many people believe that they see the end result of someone who's successful in a particular category, and they say, "Oh, I would like to achieve that," but they don't realize all the work that goes into putting a company together and going out and teaching people, because you have different personalities that you're dealing with. And it can be a struggle. But in 2014, what kind of pushed me towards that is I was in a law enforcement class, and he was teaching use of force, and that's something I was passionate about. And I'm listening to the instructor, and it was more just a sit and get type situation, to where it was just him speaking, and there was really no interaction. with the students. And I really thought, I can do better than this. And I guess it's ego to a certain degree. And I know we all have an ego. And so I decided at that point when I was sitting in that class, I said, why am I not doing this? Because I can do better than this in my mind. Now, again, that goes back to ego, I guess. But in my mind, I decided I could do better. And I said, so why don't I do this? And so, I guess you either got to be a fool or you got to have enough confidence in yourself to be able to step out there and do something that puts you in the limelight. And anytime you're dealing with your peers in this type of environment, it definitely puts you in the limelight. And then you have the naysayers on the other side that, that do the same thing you do. And so maybe I was one of the naysayers when I was listening to him. I don't know.
Awesome. In my last show, I was speaking with Christopher Hoyer. He was with Phoenix PD for 18 years and, retired, some things that led up to that. And, he wrote the book, training for the day, training for the fight, or when that day comes, training for the fight. Excuse me. And we also had Chris Gregorio, he's active law enforcement in Northeast. And we were kind of talking about the situations to where with not necessarily the funding of police completely, but the minimal funding that law enforcement agencies provide. So, and one of the topics that came up was, when they take away funding for law enforcement agencies, one of the first things that go is training. And I think that's why it's a beautiful thing of what you do, because, it kind of minimizes that cost realistically. I mean, for the cost of your programs, no matter which one of the systems or the training courses that they opt to take, your cost of acquisition and the provisions that you guys provide, it's phenomenal. And I think that more law enforcement agencies should be exposed to what it is that you're providing. That's one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on here. But so how does that play into effect? Because I know you guys do travel nationwide, and how does that come into effect as far as when agencies themselves need your provisions? Okay. Does that come on to where the chief has to make the decision, or how can we get your provisions into more law enforcement agencies, whether it be the municipalities, the cities, the counties, the states?
Well, we've seen a definite increase even in 2019, 2020. We even during COVID, which COVID is still going on, but we saw an increase in business, and I think that's due to what we provide. And it's unfortunate when you're talking about these budget cuts. We've had officers that actually pay for their own training to come to, and some of these officers are making $40,000 a year to be a police officer, to get potentially shot and killed. And they're actually paying for their own training. And we shouldn't have that type of environment where, these obviously these law enforcement officers care about their level of training, and they want to provide training to their fellow officers. That's why they're coming to our courses. And I always tell them, I said, if you're paying for training out of your own pocket, let us know beforehand. We'll work with you. That's not we want people who are passionate about training to come to our classes, because they're going to be good representatives for not only law enforcement, but for our company as well. So if we have someone who's passionate about doing that, then yeah, we're going to help them in any way we can to make it definitely affordable for them. Most officers, when they're seeing training, they're finding it online, they're finding it through social media, something like that, and they're actually putting in for it, and it has to have that approval by the chief. Now, each year, budgets for departments is big as well. And so when we look at that, a lot of them go from October to October. So right now we're at the end of that budget year. So you'll see a lot of training, depending on the state and the area, start to drop off because they're getting close to that budget year. And you see some that maybe have a little bit of money left over, because during COVID, there wasn't as much training going on. So some of that training budget is still left, and some are trying to spend that little bit of money that they have now to get that training in before the new budget year.
Okay, perfect. And now, how far in advance does an agency or an officer have to schedule a training? Let's focus on agencies right now. So how far in advance would an agency have to notify you, your department, or on them requesting? Because I know I see your schedule all the time, and that's what's great about your site as well too, because you guys do post, the upcoming events and places of where you're actually providing the training. But if someone wanted to schedule, or like if I or one of my companies, we wanted to actually give that provision to a law enforcement agency, how far in advance do you, your partners, need to be able to set that aside and allot that training for that division or those officers?
Well, it's kind of a twofold answer to that as well, because it really depends. If they're looking to be a host agency, we provide free slots for hosting, and if they are looking, to have a private training event, for instance, then we really don't have to do as much advertising. So we can really get that, if it's open in our schedule, we can get them in pretty quick. But generally, it's going to be about a 3 or 4 month advance notice, because we have to be able to advertise to get other officers, because that host agency generally is not paying anything to be a host agency, and so we don't charge them anything to host, and they actually get those free slots for hosting, which is beneficial to them.
Okay, hey, I'm about to add Christopher Hoyer, the gentleman I was just speaking. He just jumped into the stream. I'm going to add him in with us real quick. That way he can kind of add some insight or ask any questions as well too.
Sure.
Hey, Christopher. Good morning.
What's going on, guys? How are you?
Blessed. Christopher, this is Ray Beshirs, Blue Shield Tactical, and Ray, this is the gentleman I was just telling you about, the retired Phoenix PD law enforcement writer of the book of When That Day Comes, Training for the Fight, Christopher Hoyer.
How are you, Ray?
Nice to meet you, Chris.
You too.
So now, in regard to the hosting agencies, so is that a long-term event where you're able to utilize that agency for your trainings at your will, or is it things to where it's scheduled to, again, like that 3 month advance notice that you're saying, as far as, hey, we have this hosting facility agency, this is where the training is going to be provided, so kind of make your way here. So how does let's focus on the hosting right now. How does that hosting work?
Well, they send us an email generally saying, hey, they're interested in this particular course and they're wanting to host in this. So what we do is we send them some options. I don't teach everything. We have 9 instructors that teach various topics. Right. So I don't teach everything, thank goodness, because one thing that I would be run ragged by trying to keep up with all the courses we teach. But at the same time, they send us the email letting us know which course they're wanting to host, and then we provide them some options there for the training dates, unless they're wanting a certain month. Sometimes the school districts and those kind of things, or we have a police department that's using a school room. Wrestling mats or something like that, if they're talking about the defensive tactics aspect of it. And so they can only host at certain times of the year. So we try to fit them in because school's out. And that's when they try to host those individual events. But we work with them as much as we can on being able to get that set up so that they can host. Like I said, we don't charge them anything to host. So we try to make it as easy as possible. We don't have a bunch of contracts we have them to sign. We do it by email. We do it by basically a handshake. We say, okay, here's what we're expecting of you. Here's what you're expecting of us. And we've been very fortunate to be able to go back to these agencies because once they experience the level of training that we do provide and at the price point that we provide it at, they're really interested in having us again for the other courses, especially courses like our defensive tactics course, our De-Escalation instructor courses, which is extremely popular right now.
Perfect. And one of the reasons I'm bringing up the hosting agencies is, again, I know that it takes a lot of advertisement for individuals to even know you exist. Again, that's why we're kind of doing this show right now. And also, kind of expanding territories. So if it's kind of like leasing a building, basically, just as you covered with the schooling, to where when school's out, hey, there's open rooms to where the rooms are available and everything else too, to where if I were able to have facilities, nationwide, that were specifically set aside for training courses for law enforcement, that way I can get a calendar based for, what you already have booked, and we can start looking at that 3 months advance and everything else to where we can start scheduling different law enforcement agencies, because I do think it is vital, what it is you provide. And that's also one of the reasons I wanted to invite, Mr. Hoyer on here as well, because, he goes inside law enforcement agencies and kind of helps with different things as far as what he's seen while he was in, different preventative measures that law enforcement today can take, to better ready themselves, just as you do, right? And so if I set up the different hosting agencies, that's something that we'll be able to, kind of talk about, via email or some phone calls to kind of find out which territories would be best suited to kind of expand out, the ones that are kind of receiving that minimal funding, or the ones that aren't really exposed or have any of the resources around them to expand that said training.
Yeah, and there's grants out there as well that are available to law enforcement agencies, like the COPS grant that they're doing. Basically, the federal government is providing those local cities and counties, if they apply for those grants, money for de-escalation training, and so that's available to them as well. And that's something that right now we're in the process of putting in for. So we'll be one of those companies that provide or able to provide that type of training to them. Now, with the de-escalation, we have it approved already through multiple states. Matter of fact, it was at one point, I'm assuming that it still is, it was listed in the International Chiefs of Police Association catalog as well. The FLP had contacted us in reference to that too for a de-escalation training, because they realize the importance of that training and what it's able to provide. And there's a lot of misunderstanding as well when it comes to that particular topic, because people think that de-escalation is just verbal, and it's not just verbal. And so there's a lot to it, and we're not telling officers to jeopardize their safety when we teach our de-escalation, because de-escalation sometimes is going to work and sometimes it's not. And so we have to deal with every aspect of that. But it's important to be able to talk to people. And when I was younger, I didn't do such a great job at that. As I got older, and it was my body would hurt when I got into those physical fights with people out on the street, especially in my 40s. And I started to realize the importance of de-escalation. And it's just learning how to talk to people and giving options. That's all. It's not anything that's a secret. Most of us do a decent job at it, but some of us don't do a great job at it. And so we really need to try to work and get everybody on board with that. But right now, we're also approved in Pennsylvania. Our company is a provider for defensive tactics that you have to be pre-approved through the state of Pennsylvania. And what I really like about Pennsylvania, what they've done, and it's coming up in 2022, is that every department is required to do a minimum of 4 hours of defensive tactics. Now, that's not enough, obviously, but at the same time, it's a good start. So we're at least moving the right direction, hopefully, at least in that state.
Perfect. And now, kind of going into de-escalation. Okay, and I touched with Mr. Hoyer and one of his good friends, Chris Gregorio. I'm sorry, but in regard to things have changed over the course of the years. Okay, media is putting a big push on how the public views law enforcement agencies. There's a lot more resilience towards law enforcement agencies. There's a lot more lashback at law enforcement agencies. So through the course of years, since 2014, when you started and did everything with the Blue Shield Tactical and the de-escalation systems, I mean, I know it's all still kind of the same, but how much training or how much more do officers have to be ready, basically, as far as the de-escalation goes now? Because so many more people are more standoffish when law enforcement officers either stop them, approach them, handle domestic disputes, and the list goes on. So has your course had to adjust or change or add to in regard to de-escalation opposed to what it was, let's just say, like those 7 years ago?
Yeah, I think that we have to be cognizant of that. We have to be aware of the current environment and make those changes as they come along. And yeah, we do make ours involves a lot of culture as well. It's not just the verbal persuasion aspect, but there's a lot of culture involved in it, because most of us are not familiar with other cultures that are necessary, and we haven't been subjected to that. So it's hard for us to understand why a person may be reacting the way they're acting based upon the culture of their environment that they've been in. And so verbal persuasion does work, but it also has to evolve around understanding, the type of environment this individual comes from and what they're kind of expecting when you make that contact with them. And each person's kind of a little bit different. The other thing is verbal de-escalation, or de-escalation, that term really doesn't even stop in that physical encounter. And so even when we're using force, we were actually teaching them to try to de-escalate even when you're using force at that time. And you can't always communicate with these individuals, because some of them we know that are obviously under the influence of narcotics or alcohol and may not be processing what you're trying to tell them. But at least the person who's recording on the outside with a cell phone and that body cam that's picking up that information at the time is hearing what that officer is attempting to do. And that's to continue to communicate with the suspect that he has trying to get under control.
Right. And then, hey, Chris, you want to jump in here in regard to like the de-escalation? And again, like with the title of your book, when that day comes, training for that fight. So, with what Ray's saying in regard to the actual de-escalation, that, I mean, no matter how much we train, and as Ray just pointed out, every situation is going to be different because, every domestic dispute is going to be different. Individuals, can be under the influence of narcotics, alcohol. They may not be in the same rationale because of the domestic dispute going on. So, like in your time in, how important did you see like de-escalation training? Because it's not something that is just a given, as as Ray pointed out. So, how important would it have been for? I know you said that the Phoenix PD has like one of the best trainings nationwide, but how important is it, or lack of, do you see the necessities of the de-escalation?
Well, in my experience, I did 20 years Phoenix. Got into some pretty major scrapes, probably like you did as well. And then the biggest thing that I found with our guys was everybody wanted to get in there and get a piece of whatever it was. And so I kind of took it in another direction. Just like you mentioned, we call them 918s out here in California. They call them 5150s or EDP, emotionally disturbed persons. Dealing with those guys brings a whole nother element to it. And so what I've seen with a lot of agencies, especially when you've got like Phoenix, where you've got, Glendale on one side and Chandler and Scottsdale and all these other agencies that are coming in to help us, you'll have 4 or 5 or 8 dudes screaming at one guy. And we all know, I mean, you can't, I mean, when you're an EDP or you're on dope or whatever else it is, you can't focus on one guy, let alone 8 or 9 or whatever it is. So, so outside of just a regular de-escalation portion, which Phoenix got really heavy on because we had several, I'm not going to use the word questionable, but they could have probably gone a better direction from what we actually did out there on the street. And I'm not going to say me because I wasn't there for most of them. Well, that's not all entirely true, but the de-escalation that Phoenix implemented was pretty much the national standard, which was okay, but I didn't feel like that was enough. So I took it to the next level and I started doing some SWAT negotiation training, which I thought was just paramount because no matter what we're doing, we're negotiating all the way across the board. I mean, no matter what it is, we're going to be negotiating a guy, get the knife out of his hand or just get him on the ground or get him in handcuffs or whatever it is. And I've got another whole project I need to talk to you guys about as we get further along down the way here, because I've got a brand new project that I've now been tasked with that I'm going to probably need your help with. So I hope that answered your question, Michael. I'm not sure. So
No, it is. It's because this is an important conversation. Again, going back to, general public's. I mean, you could turn on the news any time of the day and you just see the negatives, but nobody really sees the behind the scenes of what, Ray dealt with in his 23 years, what you dealt with in your 20 years. And it's something that's still ongoing. And, training never really stops because, new environments are, exposed. And because of what the media feeds individuals, you have to even be more on your toes now than ever before. So with that de-escalation, and that's why I really wanted to kind of touch on this is, to kind of find out how much, I'm not going to say retraining, but how many additions, Ray, do you have to add in? And is it kind of a, I'm not going to say a cookie cutter, but is it all the same for like law enforcement agencies, or do you take into consideration what you were talking about earlier when you brought up about there's so many different cultures that a lot of individuals aren't, familiar with or anything else stepping in? So, and then also with military personnel, so there's different environments that different agencies are exposed to. So is it all the same all the way across the board, or is there different strategies that you and your partners implement in that, increases the readiness, let's just say, for all different officers, agencies across the board, military personnel as well?
Yeah, our instructor and Jason Taylor's our instructor for the de-escalation. It's an instructor course, so it's a 3-day, 24-hour course that he teaches. He was also in the military as well. He was in the Air Force. He was a Raven. He protected nuclear weapons, and he taught courses for the Air Force as well. So he's quite familiar with the military and what's expected there, and is familiar with their lingo, which I was not in the military, so I'm not able to relate there with that. And so, yeah, we try to, depending on who our client is at the time or who's needing that service, we try to tailor it to it. We also don't just run the same videos every time that we teach that course. So we look at current situations that are going on, and we tailor our de-escalation instructor course to the current environment, or what we're seeing out there when it comes to the videos and recent incidents. The state of Texas, actually, where I live now, where I worked in the DFW Metroplex here, and that's where I retired from. But the state of Texas came out and required de-escalation for law enforcement officers, and they made an 8-hour. Yeah, they did. But, here's the thing about it. What they did, though, is they created a lesson plan and they put it onto their state website, and they allowed agencies to download that lesson plan. Well, what you had, though, is you had trainers that had never taught de-escalation. So they didn't understand how to get buy-in. You can teach anything, but if people are not willing to listen to you and they're not willing to go out and attempt what you're presenting to them, then what's the point at that point? We're missing out. In other words, we're not even getting officers to attempt that. And for some agencies, what that turned into, that de-escalation, when they just downloaded that lesson plan because they didn't understand, they would just show videos. And they would say, okay, what do you think about this video? And they really wouldn't go into depth about the culture aspect as well that we spoke of previously. And they really wouldn't get the buy-in from their officers. And that's what the state of Texas was trying to achieve when they created this lesson plan, is buy-in. We were trying to get officers to give them an alternative. But again, if we're not teaching it in the correct way, to where the instructors that come to us actually buy in themselves and say, hey, this is something that's beneficial to myself and my agency, then they're not going to go back and they're not going to teach it that way. And so that's really what we're looking for, is to get the officers to start thinking outside the box a little bit and start getting some buy-in on what we're teaching, and because it works.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Can I jump in for a second on that one?
Well, I was about to relay it to you anyway, because it kind of goes back to what you were saying when you were talking about how, the training with SWAT, where they were doing the training, but nobody would show up, and you're like, hey, how did that even work? So it's
that kind of blows my mind. I think that you hit it on the head with culture, because I know as an instructor, I know you're probably the same way. When guys show up, if they show up at all, which more often than not it's mandatory, this kind of stuff nobody wants to hear about, because they want to just go kick indoors and do all the fun stuff, which is great. And don't get me wrong, I mean, I'm at that stage toward the end of my career when I was on, where I wanted more often than not to just talk my way out of a fight. I mean, I love getting into scrapes and all this great shit, but dude, I don't need to go home with a broken arm. I mean, I don't want to go against 2 or 3 cartel guys and end up on my ass. So talking my way out of fights, I'm all over that. So, but the other half of the culture is, like in this new venture that I've taken on, it's mostly the homeless population. That's a whole culture in itself, as far as I'm concerned. And then you've got to be able to disseminate which culture you're dealing with at any given particular time. Now, like a domestic violence thing, if you're going into a house and they only speak Spanish, plainly that's a culture you need to be aware of, and how you're going to handle that. Can you communicate enough to get what you need to get done without using physical force? And I mean, obviously the possibilities are endless here, but I love that you just threw the culture in there, because that's the thing that I'm going to start teaching with my brand new guys, trying to figure out, okay, you guys have an understanding of where we sit and what your role is, and don't stay within the lines, because you've got to go outside the lines sometimes to figure out where you need to be at any given particular moment, if that makes any sense. So
perfect. I want to touch base on that real quick, with both of you, because it's something that's kind of like out, and I deal with it every day as well too. When you have so many different, with the cultures and the language barrier is something that's kind of really out of sight, out of mind to a lot of the public. I mean, even myself, until you just brought that up, Chris, is because de-escalation, and this is vital to understand, because with de-escalation, for example, and I know that when you look at different areas, kind of like where you're at, Ray, and both of you, it's to where it is a high Hispanic community, to where the Spanish speaking. So a de-escalation, if an individual that is not bilingual or an officer is the respondent to a domestic dispute or to any call, and they're not bilingual, I mean, because seconds are critical in a lot of matters. So if you're not able to, you know, communicate, let's just say, in any type of way to where they're going to be cognizant of what you're trying to, what message you're trying to convey to them, how much does that play into, you know, de-escalation, and how do you readily, or how do you make an officer or an agency ready for those situations, you know, outside of, you know, making the call for backup for somebody that can come out there that is bilingual? How do you handle a de-escalation event, especially in domestic disputes, going in with that communication barrier or any other barrier that cultures may, you know, throw our way or throw your way?
Well, you know, it's what we have to understand is it's not always verbal either. It's also the body language of that officer when they're on scene. What are they conveying through their body language? So if someone just doesn't, if they don't understand what you're saying as far as the language that you're speaking, they do understand body language and they pick up on that as well. And we've all seen officers sometimes that upset people. Not what they're saying; it's their body language that they're putting off, or their mannerisms that they're giving. And so it's just like you go into some Hispanic households and you'll see basically it's like an altar that may be set up, you know, and it's being respectful of that religion, of that culture, and of their beliefs, and understanding that it's just like I worked in a large Vietnamese population as well. Which it's quite diverse, the city I worked in. And so you would go in there sometimes and you would see the shoes that were at the door. Well, they were aware, you know, if you stepped into their home with your shoes on, it was somewhat offensive to them, even though they didn't always say anything to you up front, you know, about, hey, would you mind taking your shoes off? But they would definitely be cognizant of that, and they would look at you in a different way. But if you're able to relate to your local culture just a little bit, if you're able to say something in their language, or you're able to come in there and recognize, something they have on their wall, and that's why the experience of an officer, a veteran officer, is so important. Because if they've been working in an area a long time, I guarantee you they probably know a few words in Spanish, especially in Texas. And so they're able to kind of relate right off the bat, and maybe speak a few words to this individual, and then have the body language to go along with it, so we can kind of bridge that gap a little bit. And then until we can get an officer out there that may speak their language fluently, that can really help them as well. So it's not just one aspect of it. It's there's much more to it, and that body language, like I said, is a key point as well.
That's huge, and I was gonna just let me touch on that too, because it's not just de-escalating our suspects and our victims; it's us as well sometimes. Because you walk in, and I know a lot of where I worked, huge Hispanic community as well, and a lot of those folks are really afraid of the police, so they're gonna do whatever you say, even if they can't really understand what you're trying to convey. And unfortunately, you've seen this, both of you guys, I'm sure, that you walk in there and you got a guy all tough, and then these guys start to cower. So what does that do? That ups their level, because now they're feeling like, well, I can do whatever I want because I'm the authority. And it's like, wait a second, we need to de-escalate ourselves to just kind of calm the situation down, just to get our resolve, whatever that happens to be, you know. And I've seen that before too, where I've had one of my former lieutenants, the guy was 100 miles an hour all the time. And I'm like, boss, slow down, man, slow down. Let's walk down. Like, you know, like Bob says on Colors, you know, it's like, we don't need to go in there hair on fire for all these things. When the time comes, yes. But if we kind of go in there and just have that demeanor that they can respond to, it's usually a much better outcome. Now, obviously, if it's going to be violent, people are throwing chairs and knives and shit like that, well, that's going to change, of course. But, you know.
Well, it's also the way we leave that situation, you know.
Oh,
if we leave that situation, I mean, because there's plenty of times where kids are present. And so we get out there, and when we take a family member away, maybe that we arrest for a domestic violence issue, it's how we leave that situation. So do we want to, even though we took away their parent, do we want to at least try to make it somewhat a better understanding? So maybe we leave a teddy bear with them, or we leave them a little bit of memorabilia from the police department, and then we maybe go by there and check on, or stop off and talk to them if we see them outside playing. I mean, it's just there's ways you can build a rapport with the community, And we've got to be better at doing that sometimes than what we do. We got to be more proactive. We like to be proactive when it comes to crime, but we need to be more proactive when it comes to building relationship. And there's so much misinformation that's out there right now in reference to law enforcement, and we're really going to start redirecting that and doing a better job of communicating what we do and why we do it.
Yeah, I agree.
And another thing too. So, because what is it? This past year, I don't want to say the whole year, but how they've been talking about having a mediator that rides along with officers, and that's again why I wanted to kind of have this conversation with you, because it's and then they talk about budget cuts to where, hey, they're taken away from training, but then they want to talk about, having a ride along de-escalator with you, or, a counselor, let's say. But, if proper training, what both of you do, and Ray, your situation where you're providing de-escalation for these officers, why not implement that into where every officer has that ability, rather than having to try to rely on, some ride along as that, I don't want to say the negotiator, but in the same sense, I mean, every situation you go into, every officer has to be a negotiator to some extent, correct? So, I mean, how much realistically is it a benefit to have a separate individual? I mean, it's always good to have a partner with you, but for them to talk about the extra cost of having another individual there, just only specifically for de-escalation events, where it would just make more sense and be more cost effective to train every officer for that moment. So how much does that play into effect as far as, trying to push and try to make this, because Chris and I were also talking about, some of the different trainings that he does, to where I really believe what both of you do should be something that's mandatory training for law enforcement agencies and officers across the nation. I mean, it's just a benefit that I feel that it should be mandatory. Like, Ray, you touched on it, and where they're just watching videos. But if you don't have that live person there interacting and putting like real life situations about hey, what this just said right here, this is how it's going to relate to when you go out here in the field and, you run into the different cultures, the different environments, the different drug addicts, alcoholics, or domestic disputes that you're going to face on every day,
Yeah, it's definitely, we're doing better, should I say. Law enforcement's doing a better job of providing training when it comes to de-escalation, because, of course, right now that is the flavor of the month, or their flavor of the year, and it should be something that continues. And, it used to be taught through verbal judo back in the day, I think it was in the 90s, or even sooner than that, verbal judo was around. And, of course, we kind of got away from that. And when it goes back to one of the things that Chris touched on was, the SWAT aspect. There's so many people so many officers that want to be special operations, and that's very little of what we do in law enforcement. But I tell you what we do on a daily basis. We communicate with people. We talk to people on a daily basis. So why aren't we better versed in that? It's just like we're going to go more hands-on with someone than we're ever going to use our firearm. So why aren't we more versed in going hands-on with people and to communicate with them during that and before that? So hopefully we don't have to go hands-on. But so I think we're doing a better job at it, but it's going to take checks and balances as well. It's going to take these supervisors. The biggest problems I think we have in law enforcement is failure to supervise and failure to train. So we really need to start concentrating on, as well as these supervisors, holding officers accountable, making sure that they're reviewing these incidents to where they say, hey, what could we have done a better job here as far as de-escalation, or did we do a good job? And if the officer did a really good job, let's also point that out. There's a lot of officers doing great things on a daily basis. And unfortunately, not every department says, hey, I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you doing the traffic stops you do. I appreciate the encounters you have. We're so stat driven as law enforcement officers, or law enforcement agencies. And so we get hung up on those stats and we think, well, an officer's not doing anything if they don't have a bunch of citations. They're not doing anything if they don't have a bunch of arrests. And what we don't realize, we miss the fact that maybe they're out there and they know all their business owners. Maybe they're out there and they're stopping off and they're throwing a ball with a kid. Maybe they're doing more in their community than going out there and writing citations, making arrests. And we assume that's what a police officer is, when there's much more to it.
Exactly. And Christopher, if you remember from, our show and with, you and Chris, Chris brought up a great point as well too. And I'm and what Ray just said is kind of what kind of triggered in my mind about, law enforcement, the supervisors, actually training. But it's also the leading by example aspect as well. Because Ray, just to kind of, bring you up to speed on it, to where we were talking about, officers being able to admit that they have things going on with themselves, and, having to go talk to, the head shrink or anything else like that. And, having the supervisors going in there in front of everybody in God and country to see them going in there, it plays that mind on individuals. So, hey, this is the way that things are supposed to be done. So, to kind of touch on your point about, them actually providing the training, a lot of training, the best training in the world is always going to be an individual that is leading by example. You know what I mean? So, with the supervisors receiving your training, let's say, and them being able to say that, hey, I need this training too. And, whether it be a refresher course or some of the things may be brand new, it's important that the supervisors do become, as you stated, proactive in, their different departments, their agencies, and even during roll call. Roll call is the best time because everybody is there to be able to collaborate and see where everybody's mind's at, and then kind of reinvent or introduce in, hey, we got these de-escalation trainings that, if it's something that the agency as a whole, the chief that make as a whole, that was mandatory, having the supervisors being suggestive of that, it would push what you do a long way, because again, the leading by example.
Yeah, I agree. You have, matter of fact, we had T.R.U.T.H Police Department in Indiana. Who their chief came to our de-escalation training. Then he brought us to his department to train every supervisor in his department on de-escalation, so that each one of them are instructors in de-escalation. And so he was trying to get that, and I believe he got it. He got the buy-in of a lot of those supervisors once they attended the course to go back now and have those checks and balances in place, where they say, hey, could we have done a better job here? It doesn't mean we have to discipline the officer when it comes to that situation. The biggest problem, like I said, that we have, one of the other issues that we have is we discipline officers, but we often don't provide the training that goes along with that discipline. How do we expect an individual to improve if we don't provide them the training? If we just say, okay, you did this wrong. Now where's the training to go along with it to make them better at it, so where they hopefully don't do that same thing again? So that's why it's so important for de-escalation for the supervisors to be aware of it, understand the dynamics of it, and the details of what needs to take place, so that later when they're reviewing that, they said, officer, and they can say, okay, where could we have been better here? Or did we do a really good job? And let's use that officer as an example to the other ones that are on that same shift to say, this is what our expectations are.
Okay. And then now with instructor courses, okay, so to kind of get into, because you guys have a wide range of different courses that are offered for agencies, officers, military personnel. So if you could just explain the difference between the instructor course and the courses that are, I guess, for the general officers. Is there a difference? I'm sure that the training's the same, but, to be an instructor, you don't only have to know the training, but you also need to know how to, relay that training in real action to the officers. So I know there has to be a little bit more entailed in your instructor training opposed to just the general training. So if you could kind of broaden that for us.
Sure. Well, I think probably Chris can attest to this as well, that probably in his agency, there was a lot of instructors that had the instructor certification from the state, right? But that doesn't make them an instructor. Just like I tell individuals that come to, and most of them don't even teach, that have that instructor license. And it's like when I tell officers that come to our instructor course of defensive tactics or even the de-escalation that they come to, yeah, you're going to have the certificate when you pass the material. But at the same time, does that really make you an instructor? It does. You have the certificate. But now, are you going and you're doing the things that is going to improve you as an instructor? Are you actually following the path that we're creating for you? Because we want you to go back and have the buy-in of those officers. Just like when they come through our defensive tactics portion for our instructor course, I tell them, I say, guys, if you think it's just going back and just teaching techniques, you're solely mistaken there, because it's also going back and educating your administration in the route that we're wanting to take here and what we're doing, and get them on board. Because how many lieutenants, captains, chiefs, deputy chiefs do you have in defensive tactics training? You know how many generally we have? Zero. Zero. Because what they go to is they go to administrative courses. They go there to and get get the yellow brick and put it on their shelves. But even when you're going to even those type of courses, to be an administrator, to be a leader, when you come back, are you really practicing those things? Are you really trying to implement the things that you're learning in those courses? Because if you're not, what's the point of going? So I tell them the same thing when it comes to our defensive tactics instructor courses. I said, there's much more to it. So when you go back, that's just the start of it. We're just giving you the foundation. So now you're going to really have to build up on that. Now we're here to help. That's one of the things that we provide is we say, if we provide phone support, email support, free courtroom testimony. So there's a lot of things that go into that. And it's not just, okay, here's your certification, go back and teach a few techniques and everything's going to be better,
And, even having the in-court testimony is huge. It's one of the biggest, overlooked aspects of something like that too, going in there and saying, hey, this is the training to receive. Now with how much of it is ongoing? I mean, because I know that some of your courses and, individuals will see when they visit the site, or they can even see it like scrolling across the bottom right there, that
sure.
You have the level 1, then you have the level 2. But, how much more is there a suggestive sequence of the training courses that your agency provide that, I mean, do they base it on their culture, their environment of the agencies and their location, environment, and demographic? Or is it kind of a sequencing of training that everyone should kind of take heed to and take that course in those steps?
Each department's a little different, should I say. So, some teach, Krav Maga, and I'm a brown belt in Krav Maga. And so that's all they teach is Krav Maga. Well, the problem there is, and like I said, if I didn't have that experience in Krav Maga, I think Krav Maga is a great art. But at the same time, everything is a nail and everything's a hammer to Krav Maga. So everything has to be hammered in, and so that's not the case with some of the ground control aspects that we teach. So a department really has to evaluate that and say, where are we needing? Are we good in our stand-up department, or do we really need some of that along with our ground, or do we just need ground control or something along those lines? There's so many people out there that are teaching that time, and I'm a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as well. So there's a lot of people out there that teach ground control aspects, but they base it on the sport aspect of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and not realizing, because maybe they've never been in law enforcement. And there's ones that teach that have never been in law enforcement. And so it's hard for them to focus on really what we need and what we do in law enforcement. And not every part of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is as appropriate for law enforcement officers.
And then now, with that being said, like with ground control especially, so, when the agencies, when the cadets are going through and they're receiving their initial training, how much of your courses are relevant to, I mean, they're all relevant. I don't want to say
sure.
Like that.
No, that's fine.
But I mean, as far as the, going in, especially for the cadets, I mean, because, learning fresh is, and that's why I always want to promote Chris's book of how important it is for individuals to read that and, take heed to that, as the cadet, them going in, receiving that training before they're exposed to all the misleading, the misrepresentations and everything else that they're going to see from veterans and even from supervisors. How important is it to get your training into the cadets, more so than that of, the veteran officers and the actual supervisors?
Well, I'm actually glad you brought that up. Our response to aggression instructor, matter of fact, course, it's a 40-hour course, and it's been picked up by the Eastern Missouri Police Academy there in St. Louis. We're teaching it for the first time in December, but it's after we have instructors in that area for that academy. That's all they're going to teach for their defensive tactics. They're going to teach that response to aggression. So it's actually replacing PPCT, which has been around since 1978, 1979. It was created by Bruce Siddle. So it's actually replacing that. And so it's going to give them a lot better dynamic of standing ground, handcuffing baton, those type of situations. The key, though, no matter what we teach our cadets, the key is for those agencies as well to have ongoing training. And that's unfortunate. What we're seeing is most of those agencies do not have a defensive tactics requirement once those officers come to those agencies. And we really need to get these states on board to where they start mandating not only defensive tactics training for these law enforcement agencies, but also a physical requirement for these law enforcement agencies, that every officer has to be physically fit to be able to continue to hold your license and to be able to continue to be a police officer. Now, that's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take time. And I'm not saying that we need to wield it with a large stick. But what I am saying is that we need to understand that dynamic needs to happen, because that is part of the reason why we ended up in the situation that we're in today.
That's huge. And Chris, if you want to touch on that as well, too, because, one of the conversations that we were having was how much things change, every day, let alone every year, and the growth of everything else. So with the dynamics of that training, did you see anything that, even though Phoenix being, one of the highly trained, was there any kind of training lacking that you wish you would have seen more of in your department, or, the departments across the states?
Well, I'll be honest. I mean, there are times, and I don't like doing it, but I will. We're in the DT room and we're training with these guys, and I mean, God bless them. They do a lot of really good stuff, but I mean, a lot of the stuff that they're teaching is just shit they're finding off of YouTube or whatever it is, and which I get. I mean, you guys are tasked with a job. You got to come up with a lesson plan, whatever it is, and you're under pressure and so forth, because the latest, greatest thing or whatever it is. And when I went through LE DefTech for the Marine Corps a couple of years ago, I was up against a guy that was considerably smaller than I was, but he was a black belt in like 4 or 5 different disciplines, which was great. It was awesome. And we started doing some ground fighting together, and he starts putting all these little freaking slick moves on me, and I reverted back to what I do on the street, which is just basically overpowering him, And when I brought that back to my Phoenix guys, I was trying to point out to them, it's like, look, all the stuff that you're teaching is great. I love it all. Don't get me wrong. But in a controlled environment at 30% with a compliant, non-aggressive person, it works great. The second that guy starts to fight and becomes aggressive, the shit that you teach him goes right out the window. So I'm on a different kind of a level with how I handle when I'm teaching guys what I think we need to do. It's got to be, obviously now we're staying within the lines, because it's got to be something that is within policy. It's got to be within the use of force continuum as well, of course, and it's got to be something that's not going to cause undue harm to our bad guys, which, as far as I'm concerned, my former boss said, hey, if the handcuffs are off and you're within policy, there are no rules, which, of course, is not entirely true. But, if you're in a fight for your life, I'm going to do what I got to do. So, so go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to touch on that too, if you don't mind. And I agree with what Chris just said. If it's not simple enough across the board, no matter what we teach, nothing's going to work 100% of the time. And so there's a big difference between techniques and concepts. And so even though technique may fail, concepts generally stay the same. And so that's one of the things that we focus on, is getting officers. I mean, think about this. How many times, I know we've all been in law enforcement, and we've seen officers on the street, and ourselves have been in that situation, to where two officers latch onto a guy's arm, and one's on each side, and they're pulling back and forth, and it looks like 2 dogs on a rope, right? that are trying to get control of this individual. And so what we really talk about is, when you get the person on the ground, which, every law enforcement officer needs to know how to control people on the ground, because every situation we get into, when someone resists, they're taken to the ground. I've never seen someone who's fully on resisting officers who's handcuffed standing. And so when we get them to the ground, what we concentrated on is riding them like Seabiscuit. Right. We concentrate on just tiring them out. I give the analogy that it's like a video game. If you got your 2 characters in your video game, you'll see the energy bar start to go down for one of the characters. And that's the character that's actually losing in that little fight or whatever it may be for the video game. So it's the same thing when law enforcement officers are on the street. It may not be a technique, but if you can work together as a team and control a person on the ground and lay your body weight on them, and both have the same ideology, the same goal, and not worry about handcuffing, because handcuffing is for compliant people. That's where we got to understand that as well. Handcuffing never looks like, in the middle of a fight, what you looks like at training in a DT room, because it's always just however we can get cuffs on this individual. So we really got to concentrate on working as a team and realizing that we just got to tire this person out till they're ready to be handcuffed. And sometimes that's just laying on them.
And that plays a large part in what you were saying about individuals and the officers actually having to have that physicality test and be at a certain par for them to even, maintain their license or maintain, their shield, basically. So I mean that plays a large part on that. And with what you do, how much into policy do you try to push what it is that the provisions that you guys provide? Because a lot of what the both of you do would be very, very, very beneficial to agencies, officers, nationwide, worldwide, actually, and so how much into policy do you, your partners, or anything else go to kind of expose, your training opposed to what the end training is? What's been there, like you said before, it's from the 70s, they were used to one type of training, whereas you expose them to a proper training that's going to, ready the officers more for real life tactics. So, I mean, do you ever try to push into the policies aspect of it nationwide or in just jurisdictions to make it to where it's a mandatory training? And like you said about like the physicalities and things like that, do you try to push that more nationwide? Because I know each department have their own, based on the chief and the policy makers and that with the cities and states, counties, municipalities, blah, blah, blah. But, how much control do you like to have as far as trying to push the mandates that, hey, look, this is the training, that needs to be put into effect right now?
Yeah, we definitely talk about use of force and policy, and we call it response to resistance, not use of force. I definitely recommend changing those titles for agencies who are still calling it use of force, because we say response to resistance because the offender who is the one that calls the action by the law enforcement officer, not that the law enforcement officer is just pulling up and automatically using force. There has to be some type of action to cause that reaction by law enforcement. That's why it's called response to resistance. So we really concentrate on teaching policy as well, because you would be so surprised the amount of officers, even veteran officers out there, that cannot tell you when they can use their taser. They cannot articulate that unless it looks familiar to something, maybe in a scenario-based training situation, to where he turned his back to me, and now that it is familiar. I'm familiar with that because that's what they did in the academy, and now I can deploy my taser. Or they don't know when they can deploy pepper spray. They don't know when they can deploy baton. And so that really comes back to as well. I mean, think about this. How many times did you see I assisted him to the ground in a report? And then you look at the actual video itself, and the officer picked him up above his waist and he slammed the offender to the pavement. But he wrote in a report, I assisted him to the ground. It's because that's something that was trained years ago for officers to do. And if you look at the end result, which is possibly that officer being in a courtroom setting in front of a jury, and they write into a report, I assisted him to the ground. Now the jury is going to think that this officer's a liar, or the jury is going to think that this officer is trying to hide something. And it really paints us in a negative light. That's why we have to start also talking about not only the technique aspect, but how to articulate when we're using force and to be able to communicate while we're out there using force. And then get those supervisors on board to start not just clicking approve on those response to resistance reports, but actually sending them back to officers when there's not enough detail in there. So it starts training our officers to write a much better picture of what actually occurred. And I don't mean to be long-winded here, but at the same time, what you also have is officers writing in reports and using terminology that is not understandable by a jury. You have people that are on a jury who are plumbers, not saying that these people are not educated, because they are, but what I'm saying is they're not educated generally in law enforcement. So, you have officers writing in a report, I activated my emergency overhead equipment. And then they're up on the stand speaking that way, and the jury, no one raises their hand and goes, yeah, I don't understand what he just said, but we really have to put it in a plain language and understand that we have to be writing these reports and speaking on the stand so that the jury members actually understand what we're talking about. And because law enforcement, we have our own lingo as well. We have our own culture as well.
Right. Chris, you want to touch on that?
Yeah, going way, way back. Something I want to touch on about having that extra person, that extra ride along. Like a CIT kind of a person. On one hand, I think it's a really good thing, because oftentimes we show up in uniform, people don't want to talk to us, but they're willing to talk to this other person over here who looks a little bit softer and is more professionally trained than we are. The other half of that is just on the one portion is obviously it's bad for officer safety. You know, they're not armed. Typically, they're not wearing equipment, these kinds of things. And to answer your question on that, you asked earlier about can we get officers more squared away on these kinds of things? You guys know as well as I do. I mean, you got guys that just don't get it. I mean, they just cannot talk to people. They're great with a gun. They're great with, you know, DT and stuff, but they can't talk to people. And unfortunately, that's our culture. That's what we got to be able to adhere to everybody, unfortunately. So, like with me, I'm great at talking people down. I mean, I consider myself almost a SME on that, but I'll tell you right now, I mean, we talked about this earlier, where with a handgun, I'm not going to take a 15-yard handgun shot because I know I suck. And I know my weakness. So you got to, as an instructor or as a supervisor, you've got to recognize that you're going to have certain guys you don't want out there talking to people. So on the one hand, I do support having, like with San Diego PD, they're bringing guys on board, CIT folks, and having those people on board for every shift, whatever it is, and they're negotiating with however it is that they're doing it. As far as the supervisor's role goes, I'm sure you guys have seen this before too, and it's probably one of my number one pet peeves about any law enforcement agency, that we're not promoting leaders, we're promoting test takers. And you can plainly see where that's going to go, what direction that's going to take. And like my former boss, who I still like, I got some kind of personal issues with him. The guy's not a leader. He's flat out not a leader. He's super smart, but he's one of these guys that's too smart for his own good, you know? So that's a whole nother topic as well. The physical part, I know with Phoenix, they dropped the physical requirements that we'd never had to do after, I think it was 2006 or 7, when I had like 8 or 10 years on, whatever it was back then. The physical requirements are no longer mandatory. And what do you think happens there? I got into it with a guy, I won't bore you with the details, but I got into a kid. We were it was an active shooter. I was up on the rooftop. I had to scale a wall, get to the roof, and this other guy couldn't get on the roof because he was a fat tub of shit. And I told him, I'm like, if you can't get over that fucking wall to back me up, then don't back me up. Go 10-8 and leave me alone, because I don't want you out here. And that's a really kind of a bad attitude to have on my side, and I get it. But I was pissed. Like, now I'm stuck here by myself because you can't get over a 6-foot wall. Are you kidding me? Because you don't train to the standard that we need to have out here on the street. And so I got a big problem with that myself. So that's my soapbox. Sorry. So, anyway.
Well, go ahead.
No, I was just about to ask you about how you felt about that as well too, because it is important on, knowing what it is that's going on and being able to physically detain, physically be prepared, physically be able to hop walls, especially in pursuit. Because pursuit isn't just hey, here I can just drive and go here. It's what's going to happen when you have that resistance and, being physically capable of doing that. I mean, it plays a large role in that. So, I mean, how much does that play into what it is that you do?
Here's the thing about it. I was in my 40s when I retired. I was a patrol supervisor. And I also was a supervisor over internal affairs as well. So I dealt with several aspects of the department when it came to, these types of incidents that we see. The problem, I think, with administration sometimes, and let me tell you something, there's good administrators just like there's bad administrators. There's good officers just like there's bad officers. And I think Chris touched on one of those as well. But my point is that we can't just look at it from one aspect and say, okay, well, liability for our agency just comes from outside. The liability also comes from inside. So what I'm saying is, if you have an officer that a department terminates for excessive use of force, let's say, and we've seen that happen, when was the last time that department trained that officer to be within their policy? So what they do is they actually create liability to where the officer may come back and sue that agency themselves and say, well, the reason I used excessive force is because you guys didn't train me in how to be within your policy. The last time you trained me was in your police academy, and that was 7 years ago or 5 years ago. And so how do you expect me to be able to be current in what it's just like having someone who they can only operate a motor vehicle once every 5 years for 4 hours, right? And now we put them back in that car 5 years later. they go out and have an accident. Really, whose fault is that? It's part of the responsibility comes from the agency themselves, and that is continual training regimen. We treat training like it's a vaccine, right? We get one shot in the arm and we're good to go. No, it has to be a continual process of having those small treatment processes to where complacency doesn't become the problem, and also becoming aware and being able to articulate your use of force policy, or what we like to say again, response to resistance policy.
Perfect. And then, so how forced does the training happen, where, again, like a lot of times things aren't even brought to light until an instance happens? It's like you don't see laws change until there's a loss of life somewhere, to where, if these strategies were implemented in as a mandatory training, we wouldn't have to wait until an officer lost their life, or a couple officers lost their life, or, even the civilians lost their life. It shouldn't take a tragedy to enact these different things. So Chris, with, because you've had, what was it, 3 or 4 critical incidents, I know. So how much, and I know it's somebody from the sidelines, they're always going to have a better answer of how you could have trained or how you could have reacted in that moment. And, Ray, you can touch on this too. So, I mean, because we're always going to be able to say, hey, you could have handled this different. Okay. But, and that's why it's so vital that I believe that all officers, all agencies, all military personnel should be trained, because there is this will work no matter what type training, but in the same sense, there's different situations that populate, the sideline is going to say, well, you should have done this, but in the moment, how can you ready yourself for that split second decision? Because I also want to touch here in a little bit on, Chris, I and Chris spoke before about imminent danger, because, imminent danger, every officer themselves view their own life differently. They also view the situation that they're in differently. So, at what point does imminent danger become a reality that can be kind of thrown into the report, to where Mr. Sideline over here telling you what you should have done differently really can't say, hey, this is what you should have done? I mean, does that make any sense? Or
yeah, no, I know, because my experience is what I've seen is, unfortunately, oftentimes we're trying to be proactive, and as an instructor, Ray, I know you know this probably way better than I do. You get guys, again, that, like we talked about before, that don't want to show up to this training, and so they're not taking it seriously. And then when the time comes, when that day comes for them, they're behind the curve, and then they're wondering, well, maybe I should have paid more attention in that class. And then you roll it over to the supervisor side, and they're kind of held out to dry too, because it's like, well, I sent the guy to class, so it's not really my fault that the guy he didn't show up or whatever, even though he checked the box that he was there. And then I think a huge thing, I know you touched on a little bit earlier, Michael, was continuous training, because it's great. I mean, I'll teach guys how to shoot rifles all day long, and then we only go up there once a quarter to shoot. So these guys haven't touched that gun in any kind of capacity for the last 90 days, and then they come back and they expect to be proficient again. It's like, it doesn't work that way. You've got to continue on with what you're doing. And a huge thing for me, I mean, I hate the word liability. I hate it, but that's a huge part of it, for where, God forbid you get into an officer involved shooting or some kind of a major critical incident, and you've checked up on all these things, and then you get some slick defense attorney on the stand questioning, well, do you understand this dynamic? And then you can't explain it, even though it's right there in the training curriculum. Well, you took this class, but you don't know what this means. And then what is that going to do? Of course, that's going to come right back on us. So,
and I want to touch base on this as well too, that in regard to the funding aspect again, because like with firearm training, rifle training, when funding's cut, I know that it takes away from training, but one of the factors that's taken away that a lot of individuals don't realize or is kind of overlooked is that of munition. Okay. Because when funding's cut, the munition provided to each agency is cut. So what does that take away? It takes away you being able to go to the range or do the proper training, and whether it be the firearm training or the rifle training, proper discharge of firearm training, to where it becomes that. When's the last time you had your training? Oh, it was about like 7 months ago.
Right. So my opinion on that, I think that boils down to laziness, because if you want to be trained up, you'll find a way. You will. And I'm sure you probably read this part of the story where I was in the indoor range when I first got my rifle, and I had no other way to really get out and shoot because, they only allowed us to shoot at a certain time. So what I did was I took literally a paper plate and taped a cat toy to the end of the rifle and just walked up and down the indoor range for hours at a time, just getting that thing squared away. And then I would go into a completely dark room and just do magazine exchanges for hours at a time, just do mag exchanges. So that's how I snuck around all the other stuff that, I can't shoot the gun, but I can do these other things that'll still help me be more proficient and efficient. And it was freaking great. So I think a lot of guys that they use the excuse, well, we can't do this because of this. Well, that's bullshit, because you can if you want to. There's other ways. Dry fire is a very simple way to do these kinds of things. Obviously, defensive tactics, get a punching bag, whatever it is, all the stuff that you guys teach, we can do on our own on some level, whatever that is. If with one of your kids, your wife, one of your neighbors, friends, go to the gym, pick a sparring partner. All these things are entirely possible. So when people tell me that they don't have an opportunity to train, I call bullshit on that one. So that's just my opinion. But so.
Well, I was also going to say that we're more reactive when you're talking about foreseeing the things that we should see in law enforcement that are coming up. We wait till an officer's being injured in the line of duty, or we wait till we've been sued, and then now we decide that, hey, we need to do something about this. Well, we can see these things beforehand if we just look beyond. But so many agencies actually, and administrators that are out there, some of them, they just cross their fingers and they hope that they're not the next Minneapolis. You even notice and I'm going to pick on him a little bit, I guess you could say, but the chief of Minneapolis, you notice that when he was on the stand, they asked him, they said, about training. And he said, well, they finally asked, they said, well, should we speak to your training cadre in reference to this? And he goes, yeah, that would be best to speak to them. What does that tell me? That tells me that he wasn't aware of what the training was that was going on in his agency. And I understand that he has a full plate. Don't get me wrong. I understand that he has a lot that he has to take care of, but administrators need to be going to this training. Even my agency, they wrote into their policy that if you reached the rank of lieutenant, that you did not have to go to defensive tactics training. And so they did that because they wanted to, they didn't, it wasn't important to them. Well, if it's not important to your chief and it's not important to your administrators, how can you expect it to be important to your officers? I was a slick sleeve and I was sitting in briefing once, and everyone was there on shift that day. And the two sergeants that were on that shift, they sat up there and they said, well, one of you is not doing exactly what we told you to do. And they said, and we expect you to do better. And I said, listen here, guys. I said, everybody knows who you're talking about. They're in here today. I said, and the reason they don't do what you're wanting them to do is because neither one of you make them do what you want them to do. I said, you don't follow up with them. And so that's the reason why they're doing what they want to do. So if we're going to have that expectation of training and to meet a certain standard, that standard also has to come from the top down. And so we really have to start concentrating on that. You look at the firearms training when Chris was speaking about that. You look at the firearms training that we have now. We're still standing on the line, shooting at paper targets that don't move. We're not doing anything that is indicative of a gunfight. We're not doing anything we're just qualifying. And so we really got to start moving that direction. It's not just defensive tactics, but it's their firearms training as well, to where we're just not checking the box. We're actually the weapons jamming. We're doing reloads. There's so much more that we can do in law enforcement, but and I realize the funds have to be there as well. But there's a lot of things we can do for free that we just don't do.
Yeah. And just step on that a little bit too. I think again, it kind of boils down to laziness. And I wrote this part of the story as well. It's like, okay, so as just an example, you're a detective, you're a lieutenant or whatever else it is. At some point in time, you're going to be driving home, right? And you see a couple of your guys getting into a scuffle on the street. Are you going to stop, or are you going to freaking pass go and not collect $200? If you don't stop, as far as I'm concerned, you shouldn't be out there. You should be freaking bagging groceries at Walmart, as far as I'm concerned, because that's bullshit. And so for me, what I always said was, look, I don't ever know when I'm going to get into a scuffle. It may not be my officers. It may be my family at home, and I need to stay in shape. And again, that just boils down to laziness. Do you want to maintain that, or do you want to just take your chances, you know? So I think the funding part is a huge thing as well. Yeah, we definitely need that. And not to get too off topic here, but quality training as well. It sounds like what you guys do with your company, Ray, is stuff that people are going to want to go to. And, you know, if you get that kind of training and it's continuous, then people are going to be much more efficient on the street, I think. So.
Well, I'm a little biased, you know, when it comes to our company, you know.
You should be.
So, so I'm a little biased there. But I can tell you this. If you go online and you look at our reviews for each one of our courses, we don't filter those. We don't get bad reviews from officers that attend our courses. And I can honestly sit here and say that, and that's a good thing. And like I've told our instructors, I said, if you're going out there and you're getting bad, I can take one or two on a eval sometimes, you know, that, but if you're teaching a course and you're a new instructor for us and it's not meeting our expectation, you won't be working for us. Right. We're not just going to continue to allow you to teach our fellow law enforcement officers material that is not up to date, because that's what we see. I get people that contact us and actually ask us if we have an online defensive tactics instructor course, you know, that they can attend. And I said, no, we won't. We won't ever have an online defensive tactics instructor course. I said, how can I get up on a stand and testify that you went through an online defensive? That's like going online and getting your blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's not applicable. It's not what we do. And so how can we ask you to invest in us and your agency to invest in us to provide your training if we're not even caring about it ourselves?
Right.
Well, that's a great point. And, you know, kind of going back to what you were saying about, you know, when we go to the range and we're shooting at the paper targets, you know, we're trained, or, you know, you're trained to shoot torso, because the torso can't move as much as the head, the legs, the arms can. So that's why, you know, we're trained to, you know, shoot torso. So, I mean, when we have, you know, officer involved shootings to where, you know, it ends up to be fatal force, you know, a lot of that plays into that training to where you're shooting paper targets all day long, and we're trained just to hit torso because it's the part of the body that can't move. Excuse me, I'm sorry. But, you know, it's the more reliable way of putting somebody down, you know, not necessarily kill them, but to put them down, you know, and detain them, you know. But so, you know, how much of the training, you know, because you have the ground defense and everything else in ground control, because a lot of that plays into that scenario to where if we're sitting at the range and we're trained, hey, shoot this paper target, you know, aim for torso. You know, some of us play around and we do some headshots every now and then, but, you know, it's the train, hey, hit the torso. So when you're doing the ground control, because it takes it a step higher to where, hey, look, you know, in this moment, you know, I do want to be able to detain the suspect and bring them down to where, you know, how much of your training enables an officer or an agency to not have to discharge firearm as much because they're trained on, you know, close quarters contact where they can just come in and get them to the ground and having that physicality. So it has to be vital that agencies learn this, because if I'm just, again, shooting a paper target, I'm trained, hey, hit the torso, you know, something that resulted in a fatal force. Otherwise, if I would have had proper training to where maybe I could, you know, use taser. They got those new things out now that just kind of like wraps around the strings around the legs to where, hey, we don't have to worry about the torso. Yeah, we don't have to worry about the torso anymore, to where we can just go up and use our ground training and stuff. So how much of that plays into, I mean, I don't want to even say play into the importance, because, you know, what both of you do is vital, but how much of that could eliminate, you know, essentially the fatal force instances, to where if officers, agencies are proper, military personnel are properly trained on how to do that close quarters, be comfortable going in close quarters and detaining a suspect.
Yeah, it's quite a long answer there, you know. So what I'm saying is, a lot of incidents that we see start off with some type of either verbal encounter or that eventually lead into physical force being used. And if we would have just used force when we should have used force, then oftentimes we can eliminate the potential of using deadly force and later on in an encounter. Now that goes into several aspects, not only the physicality of being able to perform out there on the street, but the size of the offender, the age of the offender, the age of the officer. There's so much that goes into play there, and it's not just one dynamic is going to solve the problem. But I can guarantee you this: we will increase the chances or decrease the chances of deadly force being used if we're training our officers on a regular basis. And then how to articulate what level of force they use and why they used it. I think we touched on it earlier, when we was talking about, the naysayers that are on the outside. And sometimes those naysayers are even from in that officer's own agency that say, oh, well, he should have done this or he should have done that. Well, if what that officer used is reasonable, it doesn't matter that he didn't do the other. That was an option. So if the officer looks at it, it's just like I had one of our instructors that for his agency, they didn't teach any kind of ground aspect into our course. And he went back and he used what we called a Kimura lock, and we used that on the ground. And he applied that, and they said, well, we're going to write you up if you don't make it fit within PPCT. And he said, well, PPCT doesn't teach any ground aspect of it. You guys sent me to this. And then, but his agency got hung up on the fact that if it wasn't something that they taught, then it wasn't reasonable. And that's not true. I'm not trained in a landscaping brick either. But if I'm rolling around on the ground with you and I'm in a fight for my life and I reach over and pick up a rock and I cave your head in with it, it's still deadly force. I just didn't use the firearm. But it's still reasonable under that circumstance as long as I can articulate why I did what I did. And so we get so hung up on that. And we say, oh, well, the officer didn't do this, well, it must be wrong. Well, no, that was just one option. But I think that really goes back to also training our officers to understand it. List those options of what you didn't do and why you didn't do it in that report as well, because that really takes away some of that naysayers that may be out there. And how is our administration supposed to be able to make informed decisions on use of force when they don't go to use of force training?
100%.
$1 million question right there.
Well, Chris, you remember during our show with Chris brought up a great point, and Ray just touched on it. That's why I kind of smiled when he said it. But, Chris Gregorio was saying about how one of the things that is the most overlooked and ignored is reasonableness. With supervisors or, the use of force board and the different attorneys and, are looking at, these cases, was what you did within reason in that moment, and reasonableness is kind of overlooked and again, that the media feeding into this, it kind of gives law enforcement agencies that bad rap. But, again, being properly trained where it does put that reason into perspective for the law enforcement officers, the agencies as a whole, and especially the supervisors. And I know we have brought the supervisors up numerous times throughout this broadcast, and it's vital that I believe that it should be mandatory. And that's why earlier, Ray, I was asking you about, how much you actually go into the actual policies of the different agencies, because, what you do is vital. What Chris does is vital. And that's why I wanted you both to actually be on here, because I really I wanted to introduce you guys to one another, because, both of your trainings together and things like that. I myself, what I want to do is I want to expand this out and go into kind of what you were saying, Ray, about the hosting facilities, because I'll go around and get to hosting facilities to where these law enforcement agencies are able to receive your training, Chris, because again, it is vital to what you do. And I want to kind of touch base on this right here. Okay. If both of you, because I know we've been talking about law enforcement agencies, throughout this broadcast, and, Troy's VFC 13 Command Senior Chief for the United States Navy. Okay. So, when he's saying about, his responsibilities also, so how much of what you provide, because I know a lot of the different training that you provide, Ray, also is for military personnel. So, how in relation to military personnel does the training differ, or is it the same basically? Is it the basic psychology behind it, physicality behind it? Is everything still the same, or do you kind of adjust the training courses for military personnel opposed to law enforcement staff?
Well, I would say that we do, but like the National Guard, for instance, we've trained them, and we've trained at Tinker Air Force Base as well. And so, but when you look at that, a lot of our military personnel, especially National Guard, is being called upon now to do law enforcement duties. And so they really need to understand, if they're being called upon, then we need to give them the training that's necessary to be able to deal with their own population, which is much different than going over to a foreign country, to us, in a time of combat. The engagement's not going to be the same. And so we have to understand that we got to provide them with that training so that they understand that, hey, it's not a necessarily a military engagement. We're just supporting law enforcement. And so that's really what we try to focus on. So we try to tell them, hey, it's the same. It's just the same for the citizen as well. If a citizen goes out of here and uses force, just like that law enforcement officer, they have to be able to articulate why they use that force. And luckily in the great state of Texas, if you break into someone's home, deadly force can be used. Some other states are a little different in that area when it comes to that. And so the biggest misunderstanding with civilians as well is they think, well, if I did that, then it would be different for me. No, it wouldn't. It would actually be the same for you as well. You just have to be able to articulate why you use that level of force that you use to protect yourself out on the street, just like a law enforcement officer has to do the same thing.
Perfect. And Chris brought this up during, our broadcast about how individuals think, hey, I'm going to go get a gun and I'm safe now. But that, when it comes to use of force, how are you going to properly, care for, protect your family, yourself, or, your surroundings, business owners, it's well, hey, I got a gun underneath my counter here or next to my bed or my nightstand or wherever the case may be. But, how are you going to really defend yourself and be ready for that? So, I think it is huge the word, a lot of times civilians kind of discard, what we're talking about in this conversation from their mind, but it's so relevant to everyone as a whole, and I just want to touch on one thing too, in regards to like military police and stuff like that, all the badasses in the military, everybody always talks about the Marines, the Berets, the SEALs and stuff like that. But a lot of people don't realize that military police have to be trained to take every one of them down. So the MPs are military badasses for real,
Sure. My niece is actually, she's a major in the Army right now. She's stationed at the Pentagon. And so I don't have children, so I'm very proud of her. And she's definitely smarter than I am. So, you're right. The military it's very similar to law enforcement. There's a camaraderie that's there as well, and that's why so many individuals, when they leave the military, just like when they leave law enforcement, they really miss that camaraderie that goes on. And it's not much different than law enforcement, really, in some aspects. And not every police officer is well trained, just like not every military officer is well trained. But we definitely are supportive of the military. That's something that we're glad that we've had Border Patrol in our classes. It's something that we're really happy that they come and they see what we have to offer.
If I can, I just got to touch on something really quick. You guys answer this however you think it needs to be addressed, but I've found a lot of the guys that I used to work with, I mentioned this in one of the chapters, talking about physical ability is one thing. I mean, if you're, like in my case, 6'1", 190, I can pretty much take care of most things, unless I got a guy that's like a ninja, like Ray, which I'm but I find it less the physical ability versus the physical willingness. And what I've found a lot of guys now is they're flat out telling me that they will not go hands-on, they will not pull the trigger, they will not do these things that are going to get them jammed up physically or professionally within their careers. So, I don't know how to address that personally at the moment, because you can't make a guy get into a fight if he doesn't want to. You can threaten him with suspensions and all these kind of things, and the moral side of it if somebody gets hurt and all these other things. But fact remains, if you're not physically willing to get into one of these confrontations, what do you do about that? And that's way off topic. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in.
That's not off topic. That's great. I want to hear Ray's side on this as well too, because that is vital. Because even And like you said, I mean, and I made the comment that, you know, if somebody goes into the academy, you know, even in military, you know, because you look at military today, back, you know, when they had the draft, you had individuals that weren't even qualified to lift a pencil, let alone go to war. I mean, that's the reality of it, you know, and a lot of individuals didn't want to have to use force. So what's going to happen? They're going to end up dead, you know, or worse, they're going to get their squad killed, or, you know, even with law enforcement. So that training, you know, going in where you might as well be an EMT so you can see the individuals, the officers on the gurney of, you know, what you're responding to, of what's going to happen to you if, you know, you really do have that mindset that I'm not going to use force. I'm not going to use my gun, because it is going to be, there are going to be moments that, you know, force is required. And Ray touched on it perfectly, you know, so, but I do want to kind of touch on this. You know, I don't want individuals to take this the wrong way, but, you know, with women in law enforcement, and it's physicality is a lot different. Okay. There are some women that are stronger than, you know, some men and things like that. But realistically, genetically, men are always going to be, you know, I'm not going to say always, but for the vast majority have physical dominance than that of a female. So with that being said, that's again why Ray's courses are so vital, because there are certain maneuvers, and especially with him being a ninja, you know, there are certain things that, regardless of somebody's physicality or their strength, there are ways to better prepare yourself, whether it's, you know, the de-escalation by, you know, verbally de-escalating it. But there are situations that, you know, with proper training, such as Ray's, that, you know, someone that isn't really physically dominant is able to, you know, detain or get the situation under control. So how much of that plays into, is your course, you know, aimed at everyone? Does it ready everyone, Ray? Or are there special courses that you're able to provide for individuals to prepare them if you are the less physical?
Well, one thing you can go ahead and put out your email. That way they know where to send the hate mail if you saying that. No. Because I have gotten the same thing when I've said that before as well. You know, just like I made the same statement you just made, and I had a female officer actually. She wrote on the eval that I was being sexist because I said that there's some men in general are physically stronger than women. That doesn't mean that across the board that every man's going to be stronger than a woman and vice versa. But it's science, and it is the case that men carry approximately 40% more muscle mass than a female does in general. But does that play a role in a physical encounter? Of course it does. You know, even though we teach hands-on in that aspect of it, I always tell officers it's safer for you to use the tools that are on your belt. If you can articulate using those before you go hands-on, then that's much safer for you as an officer, and it's much safer for the suspect as well. But what we do is we have females that come to female law enforcement officers come to our course as well, and some of them want to pair up together. And I have no problem with that. If them pairing up, especially if there's some from the same agency and those kind of things, I have no issue with that. But we actually make them switch partners, so they have to go over to a male that's twice as the size of them. So they get to see what works for them and what doesn't. And that's what's key, because it's just like for me, there's certain things that if I have a certain body type that I'm dealing with out on the street, I'm more apt to use this particular technique or this particular concept compared to one that may not work for necessarily that body type. And so we have to evaluate the techniques that we're using, the concepts we're using, to see, okay, does this meet the masses? That's one thing, because if only a small portion of your department can do this, then why are we teaching it? Why are we teaching? We have to have it to where a majority can at least have a good chance of applying it. And if it doesn't work, because nothing works 100% of the time, not even your gun works 100% of the time, even though we'd like to think that it does. There is no tool in our arsenal that works 100% of the time.
Exactly. And Chris, you want to touch on that?
No, I couldn't agree more. You're absolutely right. And so what do we do about that? Exactly what we're talking about right now. You know, I see what Troy is responding and talking about mental preparedness, and that's what I teach. The before, during, and after. Preparing yourself mentally for what may happen, and then I love that hate mail.
At least now I know where to send the hate mail. There you go.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, if you want to black out my name, just in case. No, but seriously though, because I mean, preparing for the fight mentally is one thing. Preparing for it physically is something completely different. And something we haven't really touched on in this episode yet is preparing emotionally after the fact. You get into a deadly force confrontation, or like you said, you got to smash a guy's head in with a brick. That's something you're gonna have to live with. Now you've just saved your own life. You had to take a life in order to do that. That's a very delicate balance for so many different people, and especially when, I mean, I'm not going to touch on my story too much, but before the worst gunfight of my life, 30 minutes beforehand, I'm at the station impounding marijuana, and then fast forward, and I'm literally watching an officer getting killed and fighting for my life, and one thing just doesn't play into the next, and all of a sudden here you are, and then dealing with the after effects of something like that. Even just a fight. I mean, I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. I think she was LAPD or LASO got into a scrap with a guy, and it was literally.
Taser.
Nah, I'm not sure if it was that one, but she got into it was a fight for like 5 minutes with this guy, and she came out and was just freaking battered and bruised, and talking about all the emotional stuff that she was going through during this fight, and being able to finally subdue this guy and take him under control, and then all the stuff that she had to deal with after the fact. Like I think she had a broken orbital and all kinds of scrapes and scratches and a broken finger and something else. And I wrote her a nice letter. I'm like, hey, I want to use your experiences to help my guys deal with what they're going to be dealing with out on the street. And I'm less, well, I'm getting more into the physical side of things again now with my new position, but my expertise is more on the side of preparing yourself mentally and emotionally for these kinds of things, and that's no easy task, believe me when I tell you. So, Troy, how are you?
Welcome, Troy.
Hey, nice to hear you guys and see you guys.
I wanted to touch on that too, what he just said, the mental aspect of it. I've worked with some female officers; they're absolute beast, and I'm glad that to have them as backup. And I've worked with some male officers that are victims waiting to happen. And so,
Are you looking at me? You're looking at me.
Yeah. But the point is they're out there, and it doesn't matter about their gender. It matters about their training and what their mindset is as a police officer. And it's the same thing for the military personnel as well. There was a report that would show that there's a lot that actually don't even in a gunfight in the military that may not even be shooting at the enemy themselves, because the mindset is not there to take the life of another human being. And that's why we train. We don't want to be in that situation to where we have to take the life of another human being, but we want to be mentally prepared, or at least emotionally and mentally prepared for to be able to solve that problem. What we're seeing now in law enforcement is having a better reaction to given the guidance and the psychology after those incidents occur, to where now officers are able to deal with that mentally. Just like I tell law enforcement officers, I say, why do you think that they pay our military? They pay our military to kill our enemies, and that's just a fact. Now, they don't pay them just to march around and look good in uniform. They actually pay them to do that. And unfortunately, law enforcement sometimes has to do the same thing to be able to defend our society and defend our laws. If the people's children are being killed inside of a school, they pay those law enforcement officers to go in there and be violent and solve the problem at that moment, because that's what's called for under those circumstances. And so we have to get past that in our society and realize that law enforcement is a deadly, sometimes violent job. And we have to realize that we have to support our officers to be able to go out there and handle it, something that most citizens are not willing to do or want to be involved in.
Right.
Welcome, Troy.
Thanks.
And then, hey, Troy, and I know you've been, sending the comments over and everything as well too. So, how much training goes into? I mean, I know everything's probably internal with military, but along with what Ray's saying as far as the training provisions and things like that, how much do you guys actually retrain and do like the refresher trainings? Is it something that you guys do actively, or is it something that, hey, once training's done, you come back for a rehash? How do you find with the training? I know you're actively engaging with, the officers and things as well too. So.
Yeah, this is it's kind of a tough question, because as far as training goes, on my side and what my area and where I'm at in my field, we're constantly training. So we are the adversary. So we train on tactics that keep us fresh. So it's a constant battle with us. But just to kind of concentrate on with weapons and your qualifications and being in the military, being able to fire and command and execute, I can tell you this: there's not enough. So we can be prepared and think we're prepared, but I've got, and I made the comment in there, training twice a year to go into combat with live fire, to me, that's not satisfactory. So if we have the opportunity to do more training, we take it, we grasp it. But it depends on the mission, what we're doing. So not every day is a fighting mission. Some days it's a logistics mission. So we're constantly training 24/7. In my area, it's warrior toughness and mental toughness is what I'm more concerned about than the actual action of pulling the trigger. I need to make sure that we're training on the actual impact of the member being able to pull the trigger after the fact and to be able to carry out the mission. So, yeah.
That's no easy task, man. That is no easy task.
No.
And again, so I mean, and to kind of go back what I was saying earlier in regard to imminent danger. So, imminent danger is something that I guess even with civilians, when they're trying to protect themselves, their families, their businesses, and things like that, how much training for understanding what imminent danger is goes into these training courses that individuals know, hey, this is the time, like in Troy, like you were just saying that, hey, this is the time you fire and this is the time that you talk. I mean, but every situation is going to be different, and Chris, as but how much of imminent danger plays into that training of this is when we fire, this is when we discharge. And I mean, how much of that goes in, if that makes sense?
Well, I think it's huge. Not only is it the mental aspect of the training. I teach a realtor safety course, and matter of fact, in a home defense certification course for civilians. And I was teaching the realtor safety course, and I asked how many of the realtors in the room had firearms. And there were several that raised their hands, and they said, "Yeah, I carry a firearm." And I said, "Well, where do you carry it?" And they said, "Well, I carry it in my purse." And I said, "Okay." I said, "So, do you have one in the chamber?" And I think it was a couple of them in the room said, "No, I don't put one in the chamber." And I thought, so if we're in that moment of need, now we're going to have to get to our purse. We're going to have to put one in the chamber and now engage. And I show a video of a realtor that a guy came in and she was showing the home to him, and he actually put out a piece of rope and he laid it on the bed. He laid gloves on the bed. He laid all these things to be able to harm her out. And then she pulled her firearm and he pepper sprayed her, and then never fired around. And so it goes back to, you can have all the equipment and the training, but you also have to have the mindset to be able to use these tools. I think as most individuals would be better off carrying a knife on their person, something along those lines, than they would a firearm. That's why I have such a hesitancy to say that firearms would be a great thing in the schools for teachers. My wife's a school teacher. And let me tell you, I've taken her out to the range several times, and she's not a person that needs to be in a school carrying a firearm. And I don't mean that in a negative. I love her to death, but at the same time, she does not have the mindset to be able to use that weapon. And that's why I have a hesitancy. I think that it's great that maybe even school teachers do have that available to them, certain individuals inside the schools. But there has to come the training along with that, and checks and balances to make sure that those teachers are doing the right thing and have those firearms in a safe area. And they have the training that is updated constantly to be able to respond. Because if they don't, then we're going to have a bad situation that unfolds.
And that's a great point. It kind of goes into what we've spoken about at the very beginning of this broadcast in regard to culture. Educational and educational systems is kind of overlooked in that situation. As we know, we've been seeing it more within these past couple of years, to where, you are having school shooting incidents, and it doesn't even really have to be a school shooting. How ready are school teachers, the counselors, or even just the staff, at the schools, for these situations, to kind of go into like the realtor situation where they're showing homes and things like that. But within a school, it's that training is also being vital, and it's a system that is completely overlooked on properly training them for situations like that. Yeah, we want to keep them trained on educating our children, our youth, but they also need to be ready because of environment, because of culture, because of demographics. They should be ready for these courses. And I think it'd be huge about your courses being exposed to the educational systems as well.
Yeah, we put the answer was to put locks on the school doors, right? And then you go up there and it's like at my wife's school, and they have to press a button to be able to let you in. But what happens oftentimes is they become complacent as well, the person pushing the button. And so you walk over to the door and they just kind of look in the camera and go, and they push the button and let you in. And so they really need to understand the body language. What is this person wearing? Is this what they're wearing? Is it appropriate for the certain current weather conditions outside? And it's just like TSA. If you notice, they switch out the person that's viewing the bags on a regular basis. The reason they do that is because that person who's sitting there looking at those bags over and over again can become complacent in that area. So they're constantly switching them out to have a new eye to be able to look at some of these bags. And so there has to be checks and balances, and the training has to go a lot right along with it. And we have to pick the appropriate individuals. I'd much rather see law enforcement officers be in those schools, in those situations. But unfortunately, some of these school districts have moved away from that because they thought, oh, well, law enforcement, it's dangerous for them to be in there. No, it's dangerous for law enforcement not to be in there.
100%. And I agree with you. I mean, because, even if it just be on the level of like a hall monitor would be beneficial, because a lot of times, the presence of, that's like the presence of, Troy, this, the presence of military, the presence of law enforcement. That's why you see a lot of banks that they just have a law enforcement vehicle sitting in their parking lot, because it becomes a deterrent to where you don't have to use that force, or, it doesn't have to escalate beyond where it normally would, because somebody going in that had ill intention, seeing somebody there, they're going to take a step back or reconsider, otherwise what they would be doing, military presence. That's why a lot of times it keeps things, just knowing you're there, it keeps things de-escalated. Knowing law enforcement's walking the halls, whether it be a hall monitor, it de-escalates the situation naturally, rather than having to force the de-escalation, because once an event already takes place, it's always harder to bring that back down than to have the preventative measures or the preparedness, going into those situations.
I agree.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I think when we talk about the de-escalation aspect of it as well, we always assume, like I said, that de-escalation is verbal in nature only. But if you're shooting and killing kids, and I go in and I put you down and I shoot you as a law enforcement officer, I am stopping the threat. Therefore, I am de-escalating that situation. It is not just verbal in nature. So we have to get past that and understand that even the physical aspect sometimes is de-escalating the situation, to where a law enforcement officer or even military personnel wouldn't necessarily have to use deadly force, because they used a tool that was less than to be able to solve the problem. So that is a de-escalating in itself.
Okay, so now I want to kind of touch on that as well too. I mean, this is relevant to everyone on this broadcast. So when it comes to de-escalation, okay, so the use of fatal force being, Chris, you and I spoke on this on our broadcast, and that's why I want to bring this up. Nobody likes to hear the greater good speech. I brought this up before. Nobody likes to hear that greater good speech. But, how much of de-escalation training is that greater good speech, of being able to make that decision in that moment that, hey, what this decision I'm about to make is going to be for the greater good of not only my life, but, the innocent civilians around me, or the country as a whole, or my station as a whole, the school as a whole, or any situation. The greater good always has to be a consideration when talking about, how to de-escalate, or what my next action is going to be. Is it going to be me pull the trigger, me pull this, do that, or anything else? So how much of the greater good is built into, training the officers, training military personnel into truly being qualified and understanding and being trained in de-escalation?
Well, I think that that kind of turned into a culture thing as well, because you're going to have folks like us that understand the needs, that why I'm carrying an AR-15 in an urban neighborhood, you know, and you're going to get people that are never going to understand why did they have to shoot that guy 15 times? Well, I'm not going to apologize for that. The guy freaking shot at me first. So, you know, and because I trained to a higher standard, you know, I'm going to put the guy down, and that's how it's going to have to be, you know, and it comes down to a choice. It's like, it's either him or me, or it's a kid or him or what have you. And so trying to bring people all on the same page is just never going to happen. And I think that on some level, it's a really bad way to say it this way, but we kind of have to turn a blind eye sometimes to those people, because it's like, look, are you going to put a vest and a gun on and go out there and save the world? Then if you're not, then don't question how we're doing it. You know what I mean? And it's a really shitty way. It's a bad attitude, and I don't like saying it that way. But sometimes that's reality. It's like, look, we arm our military, we arm our police to protect our borders for a specific reason. And we need those folks out there that are willing to do these things. And there are so few that are willing to do it, you know? And I mean, I commend us all for taking up, you know, that responsibility and taking it to the next level, whatever that happens to be, you know? So.
And then, so now, Troy, with you, how much resistance, or like not really resistance, but the view that others have on, you know, where you're stationed at, is it accepted, or does it change, you know, based on time, on moment, on demographic, or, you know, with your presence being there, are you ever questioned on, you know, why you do things, just as like, you know, Chris was just touching on? I mean, how much of the greater good, you know, speech or anything else goes into, you know, why you guys make the decisions on doing what you do when it's for the greater good and the protection of the, you know, the country as a whole and everything?
Right. Well, I'm in the business to kill the enemy. There's no other way to say it. The greater good, yeah. My greater good is protecting the Constitution and making sure that we have a free way of life, period. I mean, the greater good speech doesn't happen. If you can't stand in there and you can't take out your orders or carry out your orders, then you're going to be relieved. I have a little bit different stance on it than on the civilian sector. And it also depends on what mission you're tasked with. You know, if it's a humanitarian effort, that's totally different. But when I'm downrange and in the desert, and the multiple deployments that we did and continue to do, it's one job. It's kill the enemy. There's no greater good speech. So that's just my take.
God bless you. I love it.
And then, I mean, Ray, is there anything in regard to the training that kind of instills that in our mind? Because, you know, Chris touched on it, you know, our past broadcast, he touched on it in this broadcast about, you know, those individuals, and Troy just defined it, saying that we relieve those officers. But, you know, how much of it is, do you drive that into their mind that, hey, if you're not going to be in here with full focus on the greater good, and knowing that if I have to put somebody down, I'm going to put them down, or if this happens, I'm going to do this. And you touched on it yourself earlier as well, but, you know, how important and vital is that in, you know, the trainees being receptive and really understanding and taking full heed on the training that you're providing?
Well, you know, there's people that check a box on an application that says that they're willing to use deadly force. But that doesn't mean that they're really willing to use deadly force when it comes down to it. And it can be for religious reasons. It can be for whatever reason they come up with to not use deadly force. And those individuals, obviously, we don't want them in law enforcement. Really, we don't want them in the military as well, because they again are a victim waiting to happen. And they can cost other people their lives. We saw that in San Antonio, and I congratulate the chief there in San Antonio PD. They had a veteran officer that got into a shooting, and two newer officers took off running. And so he fired those two new officers and got rid of them under those circumstances, and because that was the right thing to do. But the mindset that we teach is valuable, because you have to prepare mentally, not only for that particular situation, but for the aftermath as well. And departments really need to do a better job, and they are really picking up on it, to recognize when there's issues that officers may be experiencing, and to be able to address those issues even after the case or after the fact, because it's not necessarily, hey, let's send an officer to a psychologist and now everything, the problem's solved. No, it's not, because it may be something that actually comes up later on because they have another situation that's very similar. So that, again, that needs to be follow up with those agencies to identify those areas and those problems. And yeah, I think that we're getting better at it, but there's a lot more work that can come into it. Also, educating our community and what we do as law enforcement officers is vital as well.
Huge.
Because we have so much misinformation out there right now, even with the stats involving law enforcement shootings. You notice that most of the media never puts that out there for civilians to see. They don't put it out there because that doesn't meet their agenda. And so we really have to start educating the community in what we do and being much more transparent in what we do, and say, okay, here's the reason why an officer would use deadly force. Just like that sheriff in Florida that came out and said, you know what, you point weapons at my deputies, I expect them to shoot you. And I think that was an accurate statement. And sometimes in the United States, that's what we need to say. If you try to kill our military personnel, they should shoot you. They're over there not to be your friend necessarily when you're trying to kill our military personnel. Just like if you're a citizen here in the United States and you're trying to kill our law enforcement officer, they should use deadly force against you. Now, some people don't like that, but that's the facts.
Yeah, that was down here in Hernando County in Florida.
Yeah,
and, he was blunt about it. Hey, we will shoot you. And now, Ray, if you want to take some time real quick, I really like to kind of expose everybody to all the, I know I have it running across the bottom and it's kind of really self-explanatory, but if you want to just, do a briefing on the different types of trainings that, Blue Shield Tactical Systems does as a whole, but also the ones that, you specifically, train officers, agencies, military personnel for.
Yeah, we have our close contact level 1, level 2, which are standing ground defense. We have our social media class, which is also teaching departments how to operate their social media. If a department is not on social media right now, I just can't see that. Why wouldn't you be on social media? Why wouldn't you be out there? Because that's how you're going to get your message out when things go bad as well for your agency, is having that social media. And we actually have the one that teaches that is she was the previous director for NYPD social media department as well. And so she has a lot of knowledge, and she was also part of 2 years in the Israeli military, where she operated their social media. So we teach standing ground defense, which I think is crucial to any defensive tactics. And we teach our de-escalation instructor course, and we teach management courses as well for the law enforcement managers that are out there. And if there's something else that they're needing, we can actually tailor it to their particular agency. Right now, we're in Cedar Park, Texas. Today, we're finishing up our interpersonal skills for professional law enforcement, which teaches law enforcement officers how to interact with the public and how to be more professional when they do so, and how to really put the message out there that agency's wanting. We put those messages on walls often, our goals, and we put them along our walls and pictures, and we put them on our cards that we may carry around with us. But how often do we actually carry out that message in our daily activities and what we do? I think that was it.
Sorry. So now, is there anything else that anybody else wants to add in on this, or any questions that anybody has, or Troy, you want to touch on this, or Chris, do you have any questions? Or
no, I got experience with civilian sector coming in and teaching us ground training and close quarters combat. So we did it when I was stationed out in DC for a while, and we had SAMI instructors come through from actually Los Angeles, and I can't remember the name of the outfit that came out, but it was great training. That was something different than what I was used to seeing, and that was in preparedness for what we were about to do. But it's invaluable. Both sectors, military and the civilian sector, we both, we do different things, and we're required, and responsibilities are different. But in the end, I think we're all looking at the same outcome. So it's great to be able to work with and actually partner up with guys like Ray and his companies, and partner up with some good, ready, relevant tactical training that we could benefit from. So just saying thanks. It was good listening in. I got the little part. My day's pretty busy, so just like everyone else on the screen. And it's a good conversation.
Thank you so much for joining, Troy. Appreciate it.
Hey, Ray, I need to get with you offline because I've got a whole long conversation I need to have with you about what I'm doing now. So, Michael, if you can put us together, cell phones or what have you, this kind of thing, or emails.
Most definitely.
That'd be awesome. If you're willing, because I just need your expertise and some help.
Yeah, sure. No, not a problem. And also they can send the same hate mail that they're sending to Michael to blueshieldtactical@gmail.com as well. And that way I can at least enjoy reading some of it that's been sent to Michael. So, you got to have a sense of humor as well. Otherwise you'll go crazy in this line of work. And it's important, and sometimes in law enforcement, our humor is a little different too. And I'm sure that I know that my niece, like I said, she's a major in the Army, so hers is a little dark sense of humor sometimes as well. So I think we're along the same lines, But yeah, I'm here to help you guys. And here's the thing about it too, guys, for the people that are out there listening and that kind of thing. If you ever have questions, call us, email me. If I don't know the answer, I'm going to get with our other instructors and we're going to try to figure something out for you. I really would hate to see if you're not able to get training, because your department's not providing it, contact us as well. I don't mind trying to work with you. And sometimes we'll even do it for you for free, where you can come to one of our classes. Our goal, and when I started this company, is for us to provide good training to law enforcement around this country, security personnel. I mean, I want to make a difference. Law enforcement made a difference for me. And sometimes it was in a negative, sometimes it was in a positive, because I'm definitely changed when it came to law enforcement. But at the same time, I want to give something back. And I think we all should be looking at that because what mark do we want to leave on society? What legacy do we want to leave behind? And we really want to leave one of being positive, and we really want to leave one of making a difference for our fellow neighbors and for our society.
Cool. I like it.
Good. And I want to give a full disclosure on, I want to kind of touch on what I said earlier. I want to keep a full disclosure to where, I'm not trying to down. I completely support, women in military, women in law enforcement, but there really is a realization that, anybody with a sensible mind, we know physicalities. We know that, every one of us can physically prepare for certain things, but I just bring a little bit of realities that I like bringing things up that a lot of people try to sweep under the rug or they don't talk about. But it's the realities. That's why the whole name of my business is Truth, the reality under the headline, because it are things that, we really do need to consider. And it's huge, especially in the conversation that we're having right now. Okay. So I just bring things to light to see how much more, because what you do can ultimately readily, prepare them for those situations, individuals that may be not as physical as the next individual. So I believe it's a vital conversation, and that's why I wanted to invite you on here. And, I do want to also, I want to encourage individuals watching or different agencies that if you want to become a hosting agency as well, to reach out to Ray. And it's one of the things that I'm going to be doing. That's why I wanted to kind of bring you on here to kind of, get the public knowledge on all of this. And with, Christopher as well, I'd kind of like to do a duality on these different training courses and things like that, to where I can get different hosting facilities nationwide, whether it be, certain months of the year that we have 12 facilities that are specific all throughout the nation, or if we have ones that are there year round and they can schedule, 3 months in advance of when those training courses are on, and actually kind of keep it, going for a refresher course, and especially try to push it for new cadets going in, so.
Yeah, I'd also like to say for the civilians that are watching too, that may even be crucial sometimes to law enforcement or even military personnel. If you want to make a difference, go and apply. Recruitment is down across the board right now for law enforcement. I don't know what it's like for the military, but I do know it's down for law enforcement. And so if you want to make a difference and you want to be part of that conversation, how about going and joining? There's some good pay that can be out there that you can make from a lot of these various agencies, especially here in our area in DFW. There's a lot of departments that are hiring, that are doing moving expenses and everything else to help you out. So if you really want to make a difference, actually put on the badge, put on the gun, and you'll see how it can change you and what officers are having to deal with out there on the street. And if you don't want to do that, go out and ride along with an officer. Go out and see what they're seeing. Be part of what they're doing. And I think, it may give you a different perspective.
It's, I made a joke last time with you, Chris, about the Scared Straight program for law enforcement. It's you have that Scared Straight program for law enforcement and for military. It may change that perspective that the ride along programs. Hey, first, why don't you go look to make sure that this is right for you? Because I do different trainings on career, and I do career assessments on individuals. Before they're actually going out for a career, because it's the find the things that have the commonalities with your interests, your hobbies, or, what you've always looked into, and just kind of feel out, hey, look, maybe it's not right for you. Because if that mindset's in there, as you, Chris, even Troy spoke on, that if you're not willing to do it on full scale, if there's one portion of it, like if I know I'm not going to go in there and discharge my firearm, this career as a whole is not right for me. So understanding that and exposing the cadets or the new recruits that are going in to that very question, kind of like you said, Ray, about the, you check a box, or will you ever use fatal force? And they can say yes, but will you really do that? So people need to be in check with themselves too, and kind of feel out for, if that career is right for them. And a lot of times, individuals that have the interests, like even counselors, sometimes counselors may, find it a better field for them to go join the military or go join law enforcement, because there's so many different hobbies or interests that you'd be beneficial in a new career like that.
And it's unfortunate that some of the law enforcement out there in some of these poorer states are still making $12, $14 an hour to be a police officer. And I just don't see. I mean, it's definitely a calling, should I say? You don't get into law enforcement for the money. And there's a lot of, when we go back to the mindset as well, there's a lot of most of the cadets that are in police academies right now never been in a fight in their lives. That's why training is so important, to be able to instill the mindset to engage. So yeah, there's much more that we can do. And of course, this is a great topic, and I'm glad that we're able to discuss these things. And we could sit here, probably all of us, because we're passionate about what we're doing. We could probably sit here for days if one of us didn't fall out first, and to be able to sit here and talk about these different topics. And I'm really glad to see Troy on here as well. And I'm always very supportive of military. Like I said, my niece is in the military. My father was in Vietnam, and it's we need to be supportive of our military. We need to understand that they're the reason why we have the freedoms that we have. And your local law enforcement is also the reason why you have the freedoms that you have. So let's be more supportive of our nation as a whole. And it doesn't matter what party line you're on. Let's be some more supportive of each other, because at the end of the day, let me tell you something. We all want to be safe in our homes. We all want to prosper. And so we can find a lot of commonality in us as Americans.
Perfect. Thank you for that. I'd love to have you back on, because Chris, we're going to be doing, ongoing things with this show as well too, to kind of expose the public, to kind of work on, the civilians, as you brought up many times during this broadcast, Ray, that, the more that the public knows and the more that civilians know about what really goes on behind the scenes outside of what, we're fed on the TV or anything else like that. The same thing with Troy. People know that the military exists, but do they know the activity and just the daily ongoings that they have to go through, to make that happen for us, and it's so many of the different freedoms that we all take for granted, whether the country as a whole being safe with you, Troy, or, with law enforcement, with us being able to know that, hey, it's safe for me to go down to the grocery store, or it's safe for my kids to go down to school, whatever the case may be, and it's just kind of out of sight, out of mind. And we just take these liberties for granted, to where they need to be exposed to these things more often and things like that. So I'd love to have you back on, and, we're going to have a separate conversation outside of this too, because I do want to have some hosting facilities, so you're able to provide different training, because, I do demographics a lot, and I do the studies and everything else as well too. So I look at different agencies across the nation that, have the lower statistics, that, need that training more than the next may. So I do like to expand this out. And again, I want to have, all of you back on again. And then, I'd like to have, you and Christopher, Ray, being in contact and everything else as well too, because I believe you guys could both expand each other out and kind of, get this going how it needs to get going. And I also have a lot of, politicians as well too, that I'd like to push some policy as well too, with the different things that you have, and the more definitive side of what the programs, the courses actually do. So that way, when I'm writing different policies or proposals in, that I can actually have that verbiage as far as what the actual provisions of each one of your courses are and why that is going to be beneficial for each agency, each officer, each, the nation as a whole.
Sure. Yeah, I'm always here to help, guys, and it's always great to meet like-minded people that, and I even like meeting the ones that don't agree with me too. So that way we can at least have some discussion, and learn from each other. Hopefully, like I said again, I guarantee we can find some commonality there. So
perfect. I appreciate everybody's time today. Everybody stay blessed, and reach out to Ray. Contact Ray. It's the BlueShieldTacticals.com, and view the courses. Reach out to me whether you're an officer, whether you're an agency and you need help with the funding or anything else like that, reach out to me. I have different resources as well too. Plus I do grant writing and everything. So I can kind of help get your agency the training that you truly need and deserve. And, Troy, thank you so much for joining this. And I look forward to speaking with you here on Monday. And then, Christopher, you as well too. We're going to get our weekly schedule going and, have your book reading and everything else as well too. And I just want everybody on here to, stay safe and stay blessed in all things. And I thank you everybody at home for watching, and reach out, ask questions if you guys need to, and everybody stay blessed, stay safe.
Cool. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.